Oh, we see people coming in now. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
This is SSCA, Seven Seas Cruising Association, and this is our presentation on extending the life of old sails and a few other items. SSCA member Lee Duvall, Jerry will explain his situation right now. And Jerry has Evolution Sails, Latell Sailmakers in Hampton and in Deltaville, and also has a presence in Annapolis. We are streaming live to YouTube as well as presenting on Zoom. Thanks to our sponsor, Nauticad, who's allowed us to provide this service to on the internet. Recordings are going to be at ssca.org, also on YouTube. There's a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We have more events happening. May 6th is Chesapeake Bay. The 14th and June 4th is a Caribbean Update live from Trinidad North to Puerto Rico for the different islands. What are we going to cover? Lee's continuing with his sail decisions and installing new sails, but we have a story about him and Jerry will share that. But Lee's going to talk. Lee will join us maybe later or by, we'll post his information. They took a lot of pictures. Extending the life of sails with Jerry. He's going to go over how to extend the life of sails and also catch up on some items and questions that we had from the last in the series. This is the third in series of 3 standalone sessions. And this time I would like people to raise their hand if they would like to participate and talk. You'll be invited to talk to Jerry or ask questions, and he will ask you, stop and ask if you have questions. And we'd very much invite you to ask those questions as we go. Or you can also do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We'll cover any typed in questions if you're more comfortable with that. Now, where are these items stored after these webinars? Both on the Seven Seas Cruising Association site under SSU. And you can see we have the other 2 presentations, but also on the SSCA YouTube channel. So several different places to find these things. There's a lot of content that we put together as we start growing our libraries of content. And this particular series of 3 are excellent. I can't thank Jerry enough. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jerry. And I'll stop my share.
All right. Good evening. Thanks, Joan, for organizing all this. It's fun. If you haven't noticed, I enjoy talking about all this stuff, and I appreciate everybody listening. As Joan said, I've got a loft in Deltaville. I've been there for well over 20 years now. And we also have a satellite office in Hampton, and then we have a pickup and drop off point up near Annapolis. And the bulk of the sails that we deal with are cruising sails, and we have the privilege of dealing with a lot of blue water cruisers. And so, you know, that's the kind of boat that I enjoy working with the most. So I love doing these talks and being part of this group. Tonight, we're going to talk about, if I can figure out how to work this, we're going to talk about living with sails. Last 2 times, we talked about the buying process, and then we talked about sail design and construction and got a little more technical. And now we're going to talk about living with sails, and the sort of 3 sections that I outlined with there's caring for your sails, how to make them last longer, trimming sails as they age, some tricks to that. And then I threw in at the end some, a little bit about auxiliary sails, because we haven't covered that yet, and it's an important topic, I think. So, and as Joan said, if you have any questions, raise your hand. I organized, as I said, into these 3 sections, and at the end of each one, we're going to pause and see if there are any questions. But if you have something, jump in and raise your hand, and we'll work in So let's get started. All right. This is, I wish this were a joke slide. What destroys sales? This is not really what primarily destroys sales, but all three of these critters in the last year we've dealt with multiple times. And of all of these, the squirrels are the worst. I think we've had 3 sales in the last year, most of them main sales in stack packs where squirrels moved in. And not only do they go to the bathroom and build a nest, but they chew through the sail. And the sails, obviously the sail is folded up. They start at the top and they chew their way down until they hit the boom, I believe. So we get sails with holes every 3 feet all the way up that are jagged, chew marked holes. And they love to chew through leach lines and batten pockets and reefs, the complicated parts to repair. And then birds, we deal with birds constantly, both in booms when we're installing sails and in sails, again, mostly in mainsails. And they don't chew through the sails, but they make a horrible mess as well. And, we can usually clean a bird soiled sail, but the squirrel sail, most of the time they're goners. And then mice, we don't deal with mice a lot, but this mouse happened to be in our sail loft within the last month. So we have a lot of mouse poison around the loft in different places because obviously we cannot have a mouse living in there. Living in the country, we deal with mice, but we unfortunately have to do away with them when they come into our building. So those things do happen to sails, but it's unusual and it's preventable. The things that really do sails in over time, the biggest thing is flogging. It's actually not the biggest thing. These are the second 2 biggest things, flogging and fluttering. Flogging is when you let the whole sail flog and it just beats it and wears the whole sail. And some of the things to help prevent flogging damage are full-length battens on a mainsail make a huge difference. If you've ever sailed a sail with short battens and partial battens that are from the leach to the middle of the sail, and then sailed a different boat or the same boat even with full-length battens all the way from luff to leach. This sail has full-length battens. They're receptacles here at the luff. And they go all the way from luff to leach. And a full-length batten, it does 2 things. It supports the roach in light air. It helps to hold the sail out. But the bigger thing it does is when you flog a sail with full battens, the energy from the flogging motion is dissipated into the front of the sail. And the sail never actually flogs anything nowhere near as violently as a partial batten sail does. So anytime somebody asks me, I recommend full battens on a cruising sail. Chafe is another thing, especially blue water sailing. You have to worry about chafe. And this picture, when I took it, this was actually today. When I took this picture, I thought, oh my gosh, no wonder we see chafe on catamaran sails all the time because it's unavoidable. Look at all that stuff there that wants to chafe through the sail. This sail actually has webbing reinforcement the entire length of the batten pockets, which helps a lot because with round battens, as they rub up against to stay, it doesn't take long at all for them to rub through. As a side note, when we do see that kind of damage, it's really, or if you have that kind of damage where a batten or a stay rubs through to a batten at a batten pocket, that's really not a big structural issue. It's more cosmetic. It's not something to completely ignore, but it's not something to panic over. So flogging, chafe, I guess, is really a separate thing. And then fluttering is a whole different issue. Fluttering is when the back of the sail flutters in the wind. As I mentioned, I took this picture today, and this is Lee's new sail. He's talked about it the last 2 weeks, and we finally had an opportunity today to put his new sails on, and we went for a test sail, which was great. It was blowing mid-teens, which was a little stronger than I like to go out on a test sail, but everything worked beautifully. The boat handled well. The sails, everybody is always really happy when they get new sails and they go out on a breezy day because the new sail is flatter, the sail shape is where it should be, and everything just works so much better. It really is actually a nice time to show off new sails. But back to fluttering. Leech lines, a lot of people think that leech lines are there to shape the sail or to do something else, but the only reason you have a leech line is to stop fluttering. And fluttering is when the back edge of the sail flutters. It's not when you flog the whole sail, but the very back edge, when the sail's under load, it's trimmed and it's just kind of vibrating. We repair, that's one of the most common repairs we do, is repairing leeches that are worn right at the edge of the leech tape, which is the reinforcement on the edge. As the sail flutters, it actually hinges right at where it steps down from 2 or 3 layers of the tape to the single layer of the sail. And over time, it just wears out the fibers and the sail tears there. And as I said, that's a very common repair. So, you know, when you don't use your leech line and you bring your sail to your sailmaker, he knows what you've done, whether you deny it or not. This sail, Lee's sail, is done the way we do almost all of our blue water sails. Most sailmakers are doing these days. And if you get an offshore type sail, you definitely want to get an overhead leech line. And what that means is the leech line is dead ended at the clew and sewn in. And then at each reef, there's a little tail, and that's also sewn in. And it's all encapsulated in the leech tape. It goes up to the head of the sail and goes over a couple of little blocks and then comes down. And Lee's sail is big enough that we put a purchase system in the line just above the 3rd reef. And after that purchase system, the tail of the leech line comes down, and there's a cleat at each of the reef points and then down at the tack. So when you want to adjust the leech line, you just go up to the mast and you can safely adjust it there. You know, on a catamaran like this, the boom is way up in the air, so you can't, well, you could get to it, but it's not safe and it's not convenient in any way. And on a monohull, even if your boom is low, but if you're out on a reach, you don't want to be leaning overboard, especially offshore, fishing for a leech line. So overhead leech lines are a big, I think, a big durability item. And I want to comment on a couple of things, as long as we have this slide up, even though it's a little off topic. If you look right here at this bottom batten pocket, if you notice there's just a little bit of wrinkle or almost a small fold right here, that's an indication of not enough batten tension. You really, the way that battens are not meant to tension the cloth beyond just making it snug, if that makes sense. But they need to be snug enough that they pull all the vertical wrinkles out. His other batten pockets were fine in this picture. This bottom one needs a little bit more tension. And it's not uncommon for a bottom batten, when you first put it in, to not be snug enough because it's at the bottom of the stack and we're leaning on the boat trying to get things tensioned up. We just didn't quite get enough on that one. But people ask me about batten tension a lot, and this is an indication of not quite enough batten tension. We also see sails where people put so much tension on them that there are wrinkles parallel to the batten pocket front to back, and that's way too much batten tension. As I said, the battens don't need to, on cruising sails, and even most racing sails, they're not designed to be under a lot of tension to create shape. There's some small one design boats and small cats that they do actually use, and windsurfing sails, they use batten tension to help push shape into the sail, but we're not dealing with that on our boats. All right, this is the worst thing for your sail. And obviously it's unavoidable. If you want to go sailing, you pretty much have to expose your sails to the sun. Sun is not only bad for your sails, it's also bad for us. And I didn't put sunscreen on today, and I can feel it. Actually felt good to be out there after a winter. But anyway, as much as we need to use sunscreen, we need to protect our sails from the sun. And some of those tools are, sunbrella covers, proper sunbrella covers. One note on sunbrella is that it's counterintuitive, but the lighter the color, the less long-lasting sunbrella is. So white and the light tans, Linen is a very light color. Those don't last nearly as long as the dark blues or the black or another dark color. Forest green lasts well. And it's counterintuitive to me because you'd think a lighter color would reflect more light, but for some reason they do not last as long. And white, or the original natural sunbrella, was the worst. It mildews. It does not last nearly as long as the other colors. The other thing that has entered sailmaking in the last X years, not too long ago, is Tenera and PTFE thread. Gore developed this thread first, and they branded it Tenera. And there are lots of other makers now of a PTFE thread. And I should have looked up, and I can't remember what PTFE stands for, but it's magic. These threads are guaranteed to outlast whatever that is sewn with them, including sunbrella, which means you never have to restitch anything. If, when you're going on a long trip, I can't even imagine trying to get things restitched in faraway places. UV covers, restitching UV covers is probably our number one repair that we do in the loft to sails, because the stitches just wear out before the sunbrella does. If you're getting a sun cover restitched and there's enough life left in the sail, you should ask for Tenera thread or PTFE thread. And if you're getting a new Genoa, absolutely 100%, you should always get one that's sewn with one of these threads. The next thing that the sun does that's surprising to some is in-mast mainsails. One thing that we see, and in walking around the marina, I just can't, I shake my head, but people just don't know better. I see in-mast mainsails where there's 2 inches of white sail sticking out before you get to the blue sun cover. And I just know that sail is going to come to visit us before long. If you have an in-mast main, make sure that you get it all the way until only the sun cover is sticking out. I'm tempted to hop on boats and do things sometimes. And the reason I don't is about 10 years ago, I'm getting off track again, but about 10 years ago, there was a boat with a sail cover, Genoa sun cover, that was rolled up backwards. So I hopped on the boat. There was one car in the parking lot of this 200 boat marina. So I hopped on this boat and started messing with the sail, and a woman popped up who I woke up and just started screaming at me, and I jumped off the boat, and I've never gotten on another boat uninvited again. Even when I see things that are clearly wrong and I really wish I could fix. And the other thing with in-mast mainsails is what we see is we can tell when people have their boats with the bow faced north. And we can tell this because with your bow faced north, the slot on the back of the mainsail or the back of the mast is facing south, which means that every day the sun's coming by and it's spending some time shining through that little slot and degrading the sail. And you end up, we can see it because right along the leech, this is not an in-mast main, but right along the leech of the sail, about 10 inches wide, we can see the sail is discolored, and it almost has sort of a dry, chalky look when it gets sun damage like that. So if you have a choice and you have an in-mast main, dock the boat with the slot facing somewhere other than due south. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but I think sails do last longer when they are not docked that way. Sun covers. We see a lot of damage. This is typical. Every time we get a boat or a sail in that has a Dutchman system, this is a Dutchman system here. It's one of the fair leads. And you can see the brown here or black from the Dutchman line. We always check the top fair lead, and almost always there's sun damage there because canvas guys don't seem to understand how fragile sails are. And they usually make the opening for those Dutchman lines in the sail cover too big, and the sun comes in there and eats up the sail. And this sail was just like that. Each of those needed repairs. And then Genoa UV covers. Again, walking around marinas, I see Genoas that are rolled up, and we call it candy striping, when you can see the white of the sail next to the blue sun cover. And I don't get on boats and fix it, but it does bug me because I know that that's just getting eaten up. And occasionally we extend sun covers. We get customers who come in and say, my sun cover just is not wide enough, or it's really hard to roll it. I have to pull it in and out to get it to go correctly. And we can extend the sun cover a little bit and make that a lot easier.
Hey, Jerry.
Yes.
We have a person who on chat who is Alan Stevens, and he said that PTFE is Teflon.
Okay.
And I think that's fascinating. I know that I've used Tenera for patching or for working on stuff. It's a very difficult thread to use. It's very brittle. I don't like it very much. Haven't tried the PTFE. Is that different?
I believe that they're same. I believe that Tenera is a PTFE thread. They're very similar. If there's a chemist in the audience, I apologize, but we can just all think of them as similar products. If I had a home machine or a Sailrite machine, and all I did were, most of what I did was canvas, and every once in a while I fixed a sail or did something else, I would set that machine up for PTFE thread and never use anything else. The PTFE threads, they're silicone, so they're slippery, so they don't have the same friction as a polyester thread when you're adjusting a sewing machine. So it often takes a fair amount of adjustment to get that thread to work in a machine. But once you get it working, I would stick with it and wouldn't use anything else. Our canvas machines all are just straight PTFE thread and nothing else. And on one more side note on that is different machines like different brands of this thread. On the sailmaking side, those machines like the Tenera, the Gore Tenera thread, and our canvas machines don't like the Gore Tenera thread, but they like the Solar Fix thread. So I don't know. But once all those machines, you find a balance and they like it, then you don't change it.
Hey, Jerry, I had allowed
Yes.
Alan Stevens, who has an excellent, I think he might be a chemist, comment on the threads about the low coefficients of friction along with chemical, temperature, environmental properties. Yes, it's all the same. They're kind of Teflon, a specialty fiber. But if he has something to comment on, since you mentioned a chemist, there's Alan. Did you have something to say about the thread? You sound like you really know your stuff on that.
No, I just Googled it. But, anyway, it's saying that for PTFE is a very most commonly low cost inherently UV stable. It is 100% UV stable, it says. So that's the reason. It's also supposed to be self-lubricating, and being Teflon, it's slippery and such. It should go through machines fairly easily. It may be tricky to get your tension on your machine because of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's very slippery. So it's tension and the tension of the thread is a critical dimension in timing a sewing machine. And the PTFE just has a very different kind of tension. So you have to sometimes you put more loops on things, and we don't want to get too far off on this. The one last thought about the PTFE thread is that it does not have the same anti-wick properties as polyester thread. Meaning if you sew a bimini with polyester thread, the thread swells up and keeps water out. The PTFE thread doesn't do that. So if you get a new bimini or Dodger sewn with that thread, the thread's going to last forever, but it may leak a little bit, at least at first. Over time, it tends to work better. The holes kind of fill in, and it all works a little bit back together. But initially, at least, you can get some water. It's not as watertight. So that's the last thing. That I think that thread is a real game changer. Do you really, anytime you're getting canvas or something that is going to be in the sun as part of a sail, you need that thread on there. This is a bigger picture of that same sail. This sail actually had bigger issues than just the Dutchman tabs. It's hard to see in the picture, but when I'm walking around a sail, when you put it out, I've been doing this long enough, I can look at the sail, this area right here. I know that I can walk up to that and I can just tear it by hand. It's completely shot. And I did that. And that's a trick. It's not a trick, but it's something we do with customers. And we do it to demonstrate just how shot the sail is. But I know when I walk up to this sail, I can tear it anywhere in this section by hand. And there's more up here. This sail actually isn't making it. This sail is making it back out of the loft temporarily until we can get the new one built. And it wasn't a terrible sail to begin with. It had chafe reinforcement, had decent luff ends. It had an extra belt here on the leech. But the sun did it in and age, and it just was worn out. So sun covers are just critical. We see tons of sun damage. As I said, in addition to seeing in-mast mainsails with a little bit of sail sticking out, I often see Genoas, I'm sure you all have, where they have a little triangle of the Genoa sticking out. I guess it looks kind of cool, but I always, and I'm sure most of you do this, wrap the Genoa sheets 2 or 3 or 4 times around the sail. And I make sure whenever I walk away from the boat that the Genoa is wrapped up really nice and tightly. Another, repairs that we seem to be seeing even more than we used to are Genoas that come unrolled in storms, and it happens all the time, which is good for business, but it's not good for each of us that owns boats and want to keep them up. Another place that we see sun damage is in sail covers, mainsail covers that are too short and the clew is sticking out. People, for some reason with stack packs, like to lose the front flap and just kind of leave it off, and then the sun eats up the front of the sail. Covering the Sumbrella's job and the Tenera thread's job is to protect the sailcloth. So anytime you're not using your sails, you should make sure they're completely covered and out of the sun. All right. This is a bit of an extreme example of you should remove your sails when you're not using them. To this boat's credit, the owner got sidetracked with health issues, and this boat had sat here for 7 years. He probably would have needed new sails and canvas anyway, but he's getting all new sails and canvas. But this is what happens when you leave things, sitting certainly for 7 years. This is the north side of the boat too, if you were wondering. The other side actually didn't look much better, but it wasn't quite as mossy. So removing your sails and canvas, it reduces the UV exposure. Of course, in this climate from, November through March, we're not getting a huge amount of UV. But, there's some, and taking your sails off gets it out of the sun. It, of course, reduces the chances of getting rodent and bird attacks. Almost all the squirrel attacks that we see on sails happen in the spring, early spring. There's sails that have been left on all winter, and birds and squirrels mostly get in there and make a mess. It reduces chafe. When you have halyards should all be secure. Genoa sheets, we've seen Genoa sheets that's sitting all winter with a little bit of play in them, chafe on the shrouds. I've seen it all the time, sail covers where people, instead of taking the sails off, wrap lines around the sail cover, and they pull the lines off, and where the sail cover is moved in the wind, it's chafed through from the lines. And this is the biggest thing, and it may sound a little silly, but it improves your relationship with your sails and all of your sail handling systems. People that take their sails off every year and put them back on, or take them off when they're not using them for an extended time, just get to know their sails better. They know how they work. they find things that might be going wrong with them before they get to be a bigger problem. Just the act of removing your sails and putting them back on is, it's a positive exercise. And I say all that, but of course, if I had a 45-foot catamaran with 150-pound mainsail, I would probably not be removing it every winter. If I had an in-mast mainsail, I probably wouldn't be removing that every winter as well. But for general best practice is to get sails off in the winter, or when you're not going to be using the boat for a while. That's that's the section on caring for your sails, what to avoid more than anything, I suppose. Are there any questions along those lines about what to do? We're about to get into sail trim tricks as sails age.
Jerry, we have one question from Guyana and Rob Davis. Now they're sitting down, I believe, in Grenada. So they're coming in from a long distance. And I'd wanted them to talk, but they have dogs and people around the boat, so it's going to be noisy for them. She's asking if for cutter rigs or double-headed catch rigs, what's your view on fitting a heavy staysail rather than a separate storm jib? I would like you to think about that, and then when we get to question and answers, that will give them a chance to get an answer for that.
Well, I could talk about it now. I think, we do it a lot of different ways. And, you all, the big thing is, as a sailmaker, I'm not sailing your boat. You all are sailing your boat. So you have a feel for it. Half the time, I think people are just asking me questions to see, not necessarily in this case, but asking me questions to see if I will just reinforce what they already know. And as, if I have a kind of a day sailing person that doesn't really know, doesn't spend that much time on boats, isn't a really experienced sailor, then, I tend to, think that my opinion probably is more informed than theirs. But when you do serious cruising and your boat, then, you often know the answers, and I just need to bring out my counseling skills and get them out. But in staysails versus storm sails, we build, if it's a hank-on staysail, we often will build those with a reef that will get the staysail down to storm sail size, and we'll build it as a storm sail. We also, on blue water boats, I really like the idea of overbuilding the staysail and building it to, basically the storm sail specifications. Heavy, like at least 3 rows of triple stitch in the seams, really wide seams, putting extra reinforcement around the edges, the belting, doing that sort of thing, larger patches, and bumping up the weight of the cloth as well. So essentially building the staysail to be a storm sail. And later on in the talk, I guess I could have waited this because this does fall into the third section, but where are you going to store a storm sail? How far offshore are you going to be to need a redundant sail is a consideration, a couple of considerations. So that's kind of my thought on staysails versus storm sails. The other thing is, if you're going to drop your staysail and deploy a storm sail, you got to think about the conditions under which you do that, because your staysail is the perfect sail for probably up to 30 or 40 knots. When you get to that point, removing that sail to put up a storm sail is really not the best option. So, I mean, if I were doing that kind of sailing and are preparing to do that kind of sailing, I would figure out a way to have a dual purpose sail, either furling or a hank-on reefable sail that could do double duty as a staysail and a storm sail. I don't know if I kind of rambled there, but hopefully that gives you some ideas or some things to think about. All right. Should I move on? Okay, trimming older sails. I love this picture because it reminds me of the day that I took it. I went sailing with a customer and a buddy of mine, and I brought my 9-year-old with me. And we put up this old main. We just built him a new Genoa, so we're out testing that. But we put the main up. We started sailing along, and my 9-year-old leaned over and whispered to me, said, "Why is that sail so round?" I thought, yeah, it's. I couldn't really answer the question on the spot because I was trying to be polite. But if a 9-year-old asks why your sail is so round, it's probably pretty round. And this is about the deepest, roundest sail I've seen in a long time. It is really blown out. And it's a good example of, an older sail. And what I want to talk about is how you trim sails as they age, because it does change, and you can work with a sail where the shape is less than ideal. Let me see, I think I have another picture. So if you look at this sail, it's really full. I mean, I don't even know. I didn't put, there are measuring tools you can put on these digital tools to measure the depth. But this is a pretty darn deep sail. And even though it's very round up front, the maximum depth is actually further aft than you would want it to be. It's pretty darn deep way back here. So the back end has a lot of drag, a lot of return in the back end. And so when you're trimming older sails, there are two big things to do. One is to make them flatter, and the other is to twist them more. And we went over that last week, those two ideas. To make this sail flatter, I got to remember which slide I have next. This is an after picture. So before, to make this sail flatter, you put on more halyard and more outhaul. Those are your two biggest flattening tools. The other thing is mast bend. And this boat did have a backstay adjuster, so we put some mast bend in it. And after doing that, we were able to get the sail to look like this. So it's a bit flatter. The draft is pulled a little bit forward, and the back end is opened up some. And that's what happens when you put on, we'll go to halyard. When you tension your halyard, it flattens the sail overall. If you think about a piece of paper as the sail, if the halyard's loose, it's got more shape. If you tension the halyard, it pulls shape out of it and flattens it. And it kind of is that simple. You pull the two corners further apart and the whole thing is going to have to get a little flatter. The other thing it does, as it makes the sail flatter, is your halyard tension will help to pull the draft forward. So both of those things are desirable, especially in an older sail like this, or a sail that really is just, it's beyond, shape-wise, it's beyond its useful life. And then the outhaul does the same thing. And both of those are when I'm teaching sail trim, those are two controls that I call linear controls. The more wind there is, the harder you pull your outhaul and your halyard till you get them to max on. And the maximum tension on a halyard changes as the sail ages. This sail, I would put a lot of tension on it to get it to look like this, or maybe even try and get it to look better. One thing that happens in sails as they age is there's a rope in the luff on most sails, and that rope will often shrink and fight the halyard tension and gather up the sail. That's another common repair we do. If you have a sail that looks a little bunchy in the front and you think that rope has shrunk over time, we can adjust that, and we often will cut the threads that hold that rope and pull the sail tight, and the rope will contract in the sail 6 or 8 or 10 inches. And it completely changes the shape of the sail after that. So that's, another thing to look for in an older sail is that if that rope has shrunk over time. Halyard tension, outhaul tension will get a sail to go from looking like this to looking more like this. All right, and here's just a diagram. This is actually Lee's new sail that we were out looking at today. So it's got a pretty decent shape. But halyard tension, outhaul tension, just as sails get older, they need more of both of those things. And then the other thing they need is more twist. And it's kind of cool, this picture, I like it. I got right underneath the back end of the boom and shot up there. And you can see at each of these battens, there's a little more twist. The sail opens up as it goes up. There's less twist here. If you think about the angle of this batten in relation to, let's talk about the back sort of third of the batten in relation to the center line of the boat. This one is pretty close to parallel with the center line of the boat. And as you get up to the top batten, that's open probably 20 degrees. It was pretty breezy, as I said today, and we were going upwind, and I think at this point we had about 24 knots of apparent wind. So, it was a pretty good, as I said, pretty good breeze. And you can see it's a brand new sail. You can see a few wrinkles in the sail, which isn't unusual, especially in that kind of breeze. But overall, it's nice and smooth and twist. We were, you don't really feel the overpowered on a catamaran, but we were pretty powered up. So I had the sail twisted open like this. And as sails age, as I said, you tend to need to do more of that to depower them, reduce the drag on the back end. The other thing you do with older sails is you reef them earlier. Genoas and mains, you just need to reef a little earlier. That's something that Lee commented today. We were out in that breeze. They said, oh gosh, with my old sails, I would have had to have been reefed in this stuff. His sails were, older, were pretty tired sails. So it's pretty safe as a sailmaker when you hop on a boat with new sails, when you're going from old, really pretty bagged out sails to new sails. But yeah, you don't need to reef as early with new sails. And conversely, with older sails, you just need to reef a little earlier. I think Lee told me this is the first Genoa that he's purchased or owned with a foam luff pad. I don't have a picture, or maybe I do. Yep. If you're not familiar with a foam pad, it's actually, it's literally a piece of foam sewn just behind the luff of the sail. And you can't see it on the sail because we're reefed. But what it does, and it can be either foam or we use rope, like polypropylene, that's light but bulky, and it's there to create bulk. And what it does is when you roll the sail around the furling foil, it creates bulk and pulls some of the shape out of the sail. And it actually it'll flatten the sail a little bit as you roll it up some. In this picture, we had, we're to the second reef mark on the Genoa, and it still had a pretty good shape. As most of you know, on a catamaran, you can't get but so much tension on the forestay. So we had a fair amount of forestay sag that was kind of causing the sail to look a little round in the front. But this, for a double reefed sail, I think it had a pretty good shape. Again, it was blowing hard. It was blowing mid-20s apparent wind, and we were kind of close reaching to upwind. But the foam pad, without a foam luff pad, this sail would really not look good. It would be just totally full in the front. You'd have a big bubble. The shape would be inefficient. Here's another. This is a similar size catamaran with a high performance sail. We were talking last week about longevity of sails. This sail, you can see how smooth it is. It has it's nearly just, almost looks like it's made from a single piece of cloth. Barely has a wrinkle. And that shape will not change through the wind range. There's a ton of carbon in the sail. It's a string sail, so that the carbon is all laid throughout the sail. And this, when you have a higher performance boat and it warrants a sail like this, it makes a pretty big difference. But a sail like this is not going to last as long as a DAC run sail. It's probably a little more difficult to repair in faraway places. And there's a significant monetary cost to stepping up to a sail like this. But I just wanted to throw this one out there. I was going through my pictures and saw it, and it does look really nice. And then this is back to Lee's sail, similar shot today. Oops. With, as I said, a fair amount of wind. anyway, I think I went through that fairly quickly, talking about, how to trim sails as they age. And the biggest things, and I guess I can't say it enough because I keep saying it, is luff tension. You just put a lot more luff tension on a sail that's aged to pull the draft forward and to flatten the thing. Same with the outhaul, pull it really tight. And then putting more twist in it. And we haven't really looked at any pictures of Genoas, except for the reefed one there. The trick with the Genoa is the same thing, twisting the top open, moving the car back a couple of notches from where you would normally keep it to get the top to open up. It's almost like you look at an older sail as if there's an extra X knots of wind and how you trim it. If a new sail, you would trim a certain way in 10 knots of breeze. An older sail, that might be 7 knots, or the numbers are probably bigger, but the difference between 15 and 20, you would just trim the sail as if there were a little more breeze in terms of opening it up, flattening it more and that sort of thing. Are there any questions about trimming sails as they age? If not, we'll move on to the next section. Sail inventory. And this is just something to kind of think about. And again, as I answered the question about the staysails, I just think it's good to think about all these things, whether you really need another sail or not. It's dependent on the boat and dependent on the sailor. Typically, most of the boats that I deal with that are Chesapeake Bay sailing, what you see on the screen is the complete sail inventory. Most of these boats don't carry extra downwind sails or storm sails, but depending on what sailing you're doing, those extra sails make a big difference. If you're really going to be blue water sailing, you need to make consideration for storm sails, and having downwind sails, as I mentioned last week, depends on your rig and the Genoa sizing and a lot of different things. But I just wanted to go over kind of auxiliary sails for a minute. This is actually an old sail chart. It's more complicated now than it was, 5 years ago. This is a boat that we race offshore. This is the boat we're going to be racing from Annapolis to Newport. And we carry 4 different Genoas. And actually that's not accurate anymore. It's 5 because we have a light number 1 and a heavy number 1. Full size, and then there's a number 2 and a number 3. We carry a number 4, and then the storm jib's not even on here, but there's a storm jib as well. So this chart is wind speed on the left as you get into higher winds, and then angle off the wind as you go across the top. So as you're reaching down, you switch from a Genoa to a jib top to asymmetric spinnakers, and then into symmetrical spinnakers. So, when you're racing offshore with a full crew, you can carry a sail for every condition. And as I said, this boat, we are now carrying 11 sails plus storm sails when we're doing a race like that. And obviously you're not going to do that. But as sailmakers, a lot of us, when you talk to us about a specific sail, we can get this specific, actually get a lot more specific than this in terms of a sail for a condition. And what you're looking for and what cruisers need are sails that are going to be as versatile as possible. And I'll get back to the versatility in a minute. Storm sails. A trysail is a sail that is a redundant mainsail, essentially. It's sized, 25 to 30% of the mainsail is a rough size for the trysail. It's designed to fit above. It usually has a high tack that gets it above the stacked mainsail. And it sheets independently of the boom. So if you break your boom or something happens, you can sheet your trysail without using the boom. And so you have to figure out sheeting points in the back corners of the boat. A storm jib is just that, it's a jib. This one is not rigged very well. The it's a free, it was designed, it was ordered, and that's what the customer wanted, a sail that he could free fly. And that's what we did, put a Spectra luff in this, but deploying it, I think, is probably pretty tricky. And, there are better methods. And that's why I kind of, deflected the question a little bit on storm jibs, and staysails, because every boat's a little different. And you really have to think through how you're going to deploy a storm sail. The trysail is on a track with slides. So deploying that is pretty straightforward. Not necessarily easy in the conditions you'll be in, but it's relatively straightforward, and it's secure, and you hoist it like you would a conventional mainsail. A storm sail, free flying it up is not really a great idea. You could get it on a furler, an independent furler. There are storm sails that wrap around the Genoa. The ATN makes one, the Gale sail that wraps around. One note on those, on the Gale sail, is we have customers that buy those from us. And the biggest thing I say is get it out there and use it, because they're very stiff out of the bag, and you don't want to be out there really needing it without having broken it in a bit and softened it up some. And then, having a breakaway or removable stay for a storm sail is a good method. Anyway, there are a million different ways. If you're thinking about storm sails, you really want to go back to rule number 1 from my first talk and ask lots of questions and really explore it before you commit to something. So downwind sails, most of us, we all know what a spinnaker is. An asymmetrical spinnaker is one that is asymmetrical about its center line. So it's got a luff that's longer than the leech, and it flies the luff. The tack is always forward. The clew is always the aft corner. It's asymmetrical not only in 2 dimensions, but also in 3 dimensions. It's got a foil shape. So it's got more shape in the front end, and it's flatter in the back. So it's designed to actually have air flowing over it and create more lift, unlike a symmetrical sail that's, the same from both sides. The code 0, a racing code 0, and where code 0, the whole idea originated, was the code 0 was essentially an upwind spinnaker. It measured in as a spinnaker, which means that the mid-girth, if you measured from the middle of the luff across to the middle of the leech, that dimension is at least 75% of the foot length, which means it's a pretty elliptical shape. Jibs or Genoas are all triangles, so that measurement is less than 50%. So it's 25% more elliptical than a triangle, which makes them tricky to sail. And they're really not great sails in general. You want them to go upwind, so you want the luff to be straight, which means, what do you do with the girth? In order to make them wide enough, you have a lot of extra cloth back on the leech. And these are, on the racing end, they're very complicated sails. But the good thing is, we don't have to follow the racing rules. So if we're making a code 0, I've got a picture coming up in a minute. When we're making a code 0, we can make one that's 2-dimensionally much, much better and much more stable, much easier to handle, and actually a really nice sail. And I could do a picture of one in a minute. So these are drifter and screecher are kind of outdated terms these days. Talking about drifters first, what we find is a drifter is really just a big Genoa. And as such, it just isn't bigger enough than your jib or Genoa to make a difference. So drifters are really given way to asymmetrical spinnakers. I've made one drifter, and after I made it, the customer wasn't really thrilled, and we made him an asymmetric spinnaker. Screechers are still around, but they've been sort of absorbed by code 0. So a screecher is really a multi-hull sail. It's a downwind, flat reaching sail for boats that are fast enough that they're always creating apparent wind. They're kind of flat, hard sails. So, but now most people are calling them code zeros. The two have sort of conflated. And but anyway, that's what a screecher is. And the drifter is something that, we hear the term, but we haven't, as I said, we don't make those anymore. Cruising asymmetrical spinnaker. These are, great sails for reaching. The effective angle for an asymmetrical spinnaker is typically from about 75 or so degrees off the wind to about 120 degrees. Once you get much deeper than 120 degrees, the sail gets buried behind the mainsail. And much like your Genoa, it runs out of steam and collapses. But so it's really a reaching sail between those angles. And there are different ways to handle these. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm getting pretty close. The classic way to do it, and I'm a bit of a traditionalist, is with a snuffing sleeve that comes down. ATN makes a great one. I've got a picture coming up of a couple of different ways to handle these, but as I said, I still like the snuffing sleeve. Here's a picture of a code zero. And this is a cruising code zero. So it's not elliptical. It's actually a triangle, which means it's sort of in the direction of that old drifter that we looked at, but it's a newer cloth. It's a much more full shape and it's bigger. We can make them 170% or so. This one's, it's hard to tell what it is, 165 to 180% for an overlap. And since they're triangles and they roll on their own stay, so the furler and the luff are built into the sail. It's what we call a torsion cable. So in the luff of this sail, there's a spectra. We call it a cable. It's spectra, and it's an anti-torsion cable. So as you turn the furler at the bottom, it twists the cable up, and the sail rolls around it. And you can get a tight enough roll and a clean enough roll that you can actually put a sun cover on one of these and leave it up for some period of time, which makes it a much easier sail to handle. But they're not for everybody. The code zero, cruising code zeros really makes sense on boats with non-overlapping head sails, with small jibs. If you've already got a Genoa on your boat, then again, like that drifter I was talking about, there's just not enough difference between your Genoa and a code zero to warrant having one. So, that's the application of a cruising code zero. And, we get lots of questions about them. And, we spend a lot of time discussing these. If you're thinking about one of them, talk to some people and learn a lot about it before you jump into something.
Hey, Jerry, we have questions on this asymmetrical spinnaker.
Okay.
Spinnaker. And again, that's the Davises. They're going to get an asymmetrical spinnaker to help with light performance, air, and off-wind sailing. And she's asking, she or he is asking, is there anything special we need to know in order to ensure we make the right choice of sail for the boat? Or is there a standard set of measurements taken as you do for a jib and Genoa?
Those are good questions. Yeah, spinnakers are sails that you really don't need detailed measurements. I'm pretty comfortable building a spinnaker from the boat specs or maybe some minimal measurements, but it's not like a Genoa or a Maine that really needs to fit perfectly. So there's some room for, it doesn't have to be measured to the nth degree to be perfect fit. In my opinion on spinnakers, as I said earlier, alluded to, you want the most versatile sail you can get. You don't want to get some specialized sail. You don't really want to, in my opinion, get a sail that's built as a full size running spinnaker. You also don't want to get a really flat, narrow, purely reaching spinnaker. Most cruising spinnakers that we build are what we call an AP design or an all-purpose design. And that's what I would recommend, an all-purpose cruising spinnaker. Beyond, it's not super measurement sensitive. get it. You want to talk to your sailmaker and get an all-purpose design. And then the biggest thing, in my opinion, is you got to pick good colors. You can go crazy with these. Every panel can be a different color. So you want to do something that's fun, but also something that you're going to want to live with for years. So I guess those are my three thoughts on cruising spinnakers.
Now they're also asking on the design of the spinnaker a couple things. Does it make a difference to the design of an asymmetrical spinnaker sail if you're going to use it with a top-down furler versus a sock?
It makes a huge difference. I've been dealing with top-down furlers for the last, however long, 5 years or so since it came out. And what we found, we've tried them on both cruising boats and racing boats, and we've had some really kind of unpleasant experiences with them. And then we've had lots of really good experiences with them. The biggest trick in designing a spinnaker for a top-down furler is you do not want too big or round a spinnaker. We were on a racing boat and we designed an A2, which is a running asymmetric, big full girth sail. And that sail 2 times, we threw the furler, we didn't throw the furler away, but we got rid of the furler for that sail because it wrapped. Somehow these spinnakers have a way of wrapping back on themselves on these top-down furlers. And a really wide spinnaker will do that. And it's amazing getting the thing untangled back off of the cable. So if you get a top-down, if you're putting a sail on a top-down furler, you want to make sure that it's a relatively narrow cut spinnaker. If you're using the stuffing sleeve, you really don't have that kind of limitation. You can have as big and wide a sail as you want, and the snuffer just will handle it. But you want to really make sure that the sailmaker, you talk to the sailmaker, and the cut of the sail is matched to that top-down furler for sure. So
now there's another question.
Yes.
Any negatives to pulling out the tack of an asymmetrical spinnaker to increase downwind angles? Perhaps not as effective as a full-on symmetrical spinnaker, but I've seen some people doing this. Wondering if there are any negatives.
Yes, there's a huge negative. You need 2 hands. You got to put your drink down. My thoughts on cruising spinnakers. If I were outfitting a boat, I would not bring a pole. I would, it almost negates having a cruising spinnaker, in my mind, having to deal with the pole on it, because you have to, in order to run a pole on the tack of an asymmetric, you really should have a fore guy and an after guy plus the tack line. So it's a fairly complicated rig. But in terms of performance, it's actually, asymmetricals are more effective downwind. The chart that I was showing you for that race boat, if we were not sailing in perf, we were sailing a different rating rule all the time. And I think even within perf and these rating rules we're using, I don't think we're going to have a symmetrical spinnaker on that boat. We shouldn't this year. They should all be asymmetricals. And an asymmetrical is faster in every direction. I mean, you could, assuming the sail is built for whatever, to be pulled back. But yeah, pulling back an asymmetrical works great. And that's one of the things we do on, with catamaran customers is we're doing that right now, is rigging a tack bridle for an asymmetrical. So he can move it from bow to bow and effectively pull it out, 12 feet up to weather. And he's going to be able to sail, really deep angles with that sail. And when he jibes, it's a little more complicated. He'll have to move the tack from one bow to the other, but he'll be able to, as I said, he'll be able to reach well with it and sail deeper angles. And then my joke about the pole is just that it just, it creates complication. And for me, it's, I'd like to keep things as simple as possible, but the pole is effective and it's going to be just as fast as a symmetrical, and much faster if you're trying to sail deep angles. Using a pole works for sure.
That was the last question that I see. Does anyone else have any questions?
Pretty much done. I think I have one or two more slides, but if you have questions, go ahead and jump in. We're just about, and then I think this is my last slide. This is just a picture of a code 0 sail here, code 0 furler. This is the furling system. And as I said, on a code 0, this cable, Spectra cable, is sewn into the luff of the sail. And it furls, very similarly to your Genoa furling now. A top-down furler is really cool. It literally furls from the top down. The tack of the sail attaches to the furler, and it has a swivel here that spins. So as you turn the furler, you're pulling the line, it's pulling the drum at the bottom, and it's twisting the cable, and this spins freely, so it's not affecting the tack in any way. And it turns the cable until and you actually get some twists in the cable before it starts to spin the sail, but it starts to turn the head of the furler, and the head of the sail is attached to that. And it literally starts furling the sail up at the head, and then it furls down. And then once it furls down, that cable gets all the way down to the tack, then the whole sail starts to furl up and it furls around. So it's a little messier furl usually than with the code 0, but it's pretty neat. And you can have a free flying sail with you can see the luff projects to weather, and it's a very different, more versatile sail shape with one of these. And that's my last slide.
Well, that's a beautiful slide.
Yes, that was, I think that, I can't remember where that was. That may have been it looks like cold water, but I think that was Florida in January, a Miami to Fort Lauderdale race. I mean, a Lauderdale to Key West race, I should say.
That can be cold.
Sunrise.
That can be cold.
It can. That time of year in January.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, thank you so much. And I know that everyone who's been listening is pleased. We will be posting the recordings, but we want to thank you very much and Evolution Sales for doing the series of 3. And we'll miss the weekly sessions, and hope to see you on the bay.
Thank you. You too. I look forward to seeing you, and I'll miss these sessions too. I've had fun the last few weeks. So thank you all for coming.